All right, the music went off. That is the universal sign that it's about time. It is 1:32, and in the interest of respecting everybody's time, because I know we do have a lot to talk about, we're going to go ahead and get started here. So let's go ahead and gather with a word of prayer. Let us pray. God, we are indeed grateful for your blessings to us, for the rain that comes to renew the earth. God, we're grateful that you've called us in this place for this time. We pray that your Spirit would be among us as we seek to listen and as we seek to learn. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right, so thank you for being here. This is one of our With You Always themed workshops. If you are not familiar with that, that is an initiative kind of that grew out of some conversations from Mission Network leaders. And that was last year, because several of the Mission Network leaders were kind of asking, what's happening with Presbyterian World Mission? Because there was obviously a lot of massive changes going on. For many of us in this room then, a conversation about sort of what happened at General Assembly is really a conversation about some old news. Because, you know, this has been part of, many of our lives and conversations for, I don't know, 18 months or so, if not more. But one thing that was clear was that as General Assembly became closer, a lot of folks in the pews hadn't really heard about anything. They hadn't really understood what was happening. Or they maybe didn't know kind of the history of Presbyterian Global Mission, or kind of all the players involved in relationships and whatnot. So there was a team of several folks who wrote some overtures to the General Assembly in a very Presbyterian way. They decided that they would get some of this stuff out on the floor to talk through at the General Assembly, which met last month, the 227th General Assembly. So today, in this workshop, we're going to have time later for some other things, but we just want to kind of tell that story well of what happened at the General Assembly. Of course, if you don't know what the General Assembly is, one of the reasons we're having this conversation is because the General Assembly attempts to discern the will of Christ for the church. But most Presbyterians never have an opportunity to be part of the General Assembly or sit in a General Assembly committee room. And so today we're going to hear mostly from someone who did, which is this fellow right here on my left. Now, I know there are several other folks in the room who were at General Assembly and who could offer their input, and I hope we're going to have time for that. But I do want, in the interest of time, to focus on Chip's experience and the basics of what the General Assembly decided. Now, anytime we have a conversation about General Assembly, it might be good to preface with what our goals are and kind of what the ground rules are. This is not meant to rehash any disagreement. This is also not about convincing everybody to reach the same conclusion. Where 2 or 3 Presbyterians are gathered, there are 3 or 4 opinions. So what I hope we can do is just understand what actually happened, what did the Assembly do, why did the Assembly do what it did, and where does Presbyterian Mission go from here. So if we haven't met, my name's Matt Schramm. I'm a pastor at Memorial Presbyterian Church in Midland, Michigan. I've been a co-convener of the Niger Mission Network until today. I am old news, which I'm glad about. So, but with Don Dawson, we've worked with the Niger Mission Network. Like many of you, New Wilmington's been a big part of my formation in ministry and in mission, so it's good to have this conversation here. I've been with the With You Always steering team pretty much from the beginning of this, and also among that group, I've had a lot of experience kind of with some national church stuff in the past, and so it was I was tapped to lead this conversation. But I wasn't there, and so this is Chip Stapleton. Chip was a clergy commissioner to the GA and was on the Reformed Identity Around the World Committee, which was handling a lot of these overtures. He's also no stranger to New Wilmington, and I wanted him to have an opportunity to talk with us. Chip, before we turn to the assembly itself, could you just introduce yourself a little? Tell us a little about you, your connection to New Wilmington, and your ministry.
Yeah, I am Chip Stapleton. I'm a senior pastor at Highland Presbyterian Church in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Let's see, I am 50, and I believe that I have attended 48 months. Wow. So
I thought you were going to say 51.
Yeah, well, I know, but you know, so I spent a summer in Europe playing soccer, and I spent a summer in basic training, and neither one of those would let me come back for conference. So, so missed out a couple times for that. But so this has been an important part of my life. My wife Tracy and I met here as high school counselors, and for all 4 of our kids, this is the first year. Our oldest Charlie, who's 21. And is in the middle of an internship, is not here. And this is the first time that any of our children will have missed a conference.
Is your mic on? It is.
The first
one
is.
It's on.
It's on, it's just not
Oh, okay.
Oh,
All right, well, I can talk louder until, or is that what you You notice none of the people out there were complaining because they were like, we don't really need to hear yeah, and so conference is incredibly important to me, and it's been formational and foundational in lots of ways. I don't think it's a stretch to say I wouldn't be a pastor without this place. And it is, important. And, you know, even though I've been here 48 times, this is, and been on staff for like, I don't know, 25 or something, this is far and away the most adult thing I've ever been allowed to do. They usually stuck me with the children or the youth, and so it's, you know, you guys are, it's a new experience for me. So.
Thanks. Tell us how it is that you became a clergy commissioner in your
I was actually not supposed to be. I was in our presbytery. They elect, you know, two general assemblies out, and the commissioners for the 228th, which is what I was, are the alternates for the 227th. And it was 4.5 months ago, I got a call and said, can you tell us in the next 24 hours if you can be a commissioner for this? And didn't have a lot of time, but kind of felt like, well, there's a need and I can make it work, so we did. That was before I knew I was passing up a chance to go to Puerto Rico, or you know, I might not have said yes. But and it's in our presbytery, it is. It's just a process. You kind of announce that you're interested in going, and they send you an application with some questions about why and what you might bring. That's how it happens.
And now, this assembly, we had an elder from our church who was chairing a committee.
Yeah.
And the last assembly we had a YAD from our church, but I didn't go to either of those. But all assemblies ahead of that, I kind of run the gamut from staff to commissioner. Was this your first assembly?
This was my first. I was previously in assemblies or in presbyteries that worked on a seniority basis, and so I was like, you know, 150th on the list usually or something like that. So.
Well, yeah, we're getting older.
Yeah, well, yeah, that would be less of a problem for me now.
Yeah. So before the assembly, what were you expecting? You received your committee assignment, which was Reformed Identity in the World.
Yeah.
And what did you expect that committee would be doing?
Well, I mean, honestly, I wasn't sure. You know, I mean, in Presbyterian, in our Presbyterian way, we name things in really interesting ways. I wasn't sure that covered mission. I was like, what are we? And once I found out that that's some of the stuff that we would be doing, and all of it would essentially be our interaction with the larger world and larger church, I was really felt like that was not an accident, because that's certainly where a lot of my heart lies. So it was good, and then once you start getting emails from Don, you must be onto something important. So
yeah, we reviewed the list of commissioners and went, whoa, huh, okay, let's talk to him. So great. Now, what kind of, as the committee began its work, tell us about that kind of the first experience there.
Yeah, I mean, so for those of you that don't know, this assembly anyway, the committee work was done via Zoom before the assembly gathered in person. So we, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we gathered, for, most of the day. The first day we started with a brief opening and worship, and then went right into our committee work. 10 or so hours a day on that. And before the assembly and before those meetings, we were given, obviously, if you've ever interacted with any of the GA stuff, every overture comes with a whole bunch of information about it, supporting documents and all of that. And then there's information, further information, and then once you're on your MyGA email, you start to get emails from people who want you to have certain information about one overture or another. So a lot of that, and there was, a couple webinars that some of us were, attended part of. And just, a lot of reading, which, maybe comes into play later, because I think it was maybe more than some people were expecting to have to do.
Yeah, I hear that. So as GA approached, it became clear, kind of with some of the Presbyterian media and Presbyterian circles, that the closure of World Mission was going to be kind of front and center, not just with your committee, but even actually the assembly is one of its main issues. So could you talk just a little bit about that and kind of what were initial impressions, and then kind of what surprised you in the first dealing with that?
Yeah, so I mean, initially, before we even, there are orientations and trainings and all of that to get used to the tools, and of course all of that's online because we're meeting online before we're meeting in person, and there was a kind of a push about what proper communication was, and if somebody wanted to communicate with a commissioner, how that should and shouldn't happen, and if it didn't happen that way, to let them know. And it was like, okay, kind of got the sense like, we need to do things decently in order, but it also felt like a little bit of information control, a little bit. And what was interesting to me was when we went into our committee work, and this is said without without passing value judgment on it, it wasn't, we went through our overtures in order. So it wasn't, I kind of expected, it seemed obvious to me and many of others, there were a couple things that were going to take a lot of time to talk about. Mm-hmm. And my expectation going in was maybe we put those at the front so that we could make sure they had as much time as necessary. And now I was not a moderator or co-moderator of a committee, so I don't know what freedom they had or not.
They do have freedom. I mean, I've been a committee assistant and on the leadership for committees, and you do set your own docket. I mean, you're given your overtures, but you can take them in any order you want. Actually, it's interesting to hear your perspective, because a lot of times they sort of take some of the low-hanging fruit and knock it out first. I've said before that, at a General Assembly, a lot of people haven't been in that sort of environment, so sometimes they want to take out their toy and play with it a little bit. And you don't want them to do that on something that's incredibly consequential.
Well, and that is true. I think, to your point, that I think the other part, and this was definitely true in the committee meetings, and also true, one of the things I told my congregation after experience in General Assembly is I do have a new understanding for why it's difficult to get things done in Congress. 460 people in a room, and everybody is pretty sure they've got the right answer, and some of them want to make sure they've said it a few times, and so that, and in a committee, it's not like you're in a small group. Our session at our church is 24 people, and that's too many people to have a real conversation, and there were 60 of us. you know? And so that's really, it's really difficult, and you and I were talking just before. At multiple points during the process, I was so thankful that I had not been in this position as a 25-year-old or as a 30-year-old, because that version of me would have had a really hard time not getting up to speak 15 times. And, you know, that wasn't necessarily what would have been useful or necessary. And, but, you know, the 25-year-old version of me didn't understand that.
Right.
And so I think, you know, in our committee, all of the stuff we were doing was important, but there was a lot of playing with toys and, you know, spending a whole lot of time on things that were on a list of priorities, not at the top.
Gotcha.
You know, and so, which, I mean, we were officially the last committee still meeting on Wednesday night.
Okay.
And part of that was because we were doing, you know, we had, some of our stuff was our, you know, the mission stuff was towards the end.
Yeah.
And it took time, and we only had a limited amount of time.
So one of the things that is part of the committee process is, you know, you're receiving kind of testimony of people who signed up, and not just Overture advocates, but anybody who sort of wants to speak. So talk a little bit about that and kind of what was said and what was what kind of did you feel was the response?
Yeah. So again, not necessarily with any value judgment associated.
We're giving Chip a pass for anything he said.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one of the other sensitive and you know, contested issues was about Palestine and Israel and
Oh, just that?
yeah, just that. I mean, you know, so, like, we knocked that one out in like 10 minutes. You know, like, we saw, you know, it was like, what took you guys so long? No, of course, you know, and that is one where there's a wide range of views,
Yeah.
right? And the structure of our committee support was such that one of our advocates, or one of our support leaders was, you know, from Palestine, connected to Palestine, and so I'm using that one because that's not mission related. I mean, it is mission related, but it's not about the mission overtures. And so anytime there was a question or a comment that I don't want to get into pro and anti, but was from a side that maybe wasn't necessarily for the overture as it was written, there was an immediate response from that other side, and then when we got to the and that was because, you know, she was empowered to do that, and so of course, you know, you don't get into that role unless you feel passionately about what you're doing, and likewise, our support staff, or you know, the support for our committee when it came to these mission overtures. Many of them were part of the group that made the decisions.
Right.
That were being questioned, and so I think our moderators on the whole did a very good job, and I don't know what they necessarily could have done to alleviate this, but I don't know that everyone on our committee understood that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, your resource people, I think, is what you're looking for.
Yeah, the resource
you know,
people.
A lot of the resource people that are supposed to help inform the committee about the issues are, in this case, were pretty intimately involved on some things that were being called into question.
Yeah.
And so that does create a strange dynamic. But what you told me earlier when we were talking was you sort of received or experienced the commissioners being sort of surprisingly positive toward World Mission.
Yes, yeah, I think there was, I just, you know, lots of churches are engaged in mission and lots of them aren't. And so I know that I didn't recognize most of my commissioners, so I knew that most of them didn't come to the mission conference. And, you know, so I wasn't sure how interested people were going to be about this. And there were a few exceptions, but the vast majority, and I would say, you know, all of the elder commissioners that we heard from were very passionate about mission and its central role in the work of the church. And a lot of pastors were similar as well. There were a few pastors that were maybe less so, but yeah, it was very positive. I think everyone, and again, there was definitely a knowledge gap, right, and an information gap.
Yeah.
Everyone, I think, was quick to recognize the centrality of mission and its importance in, you know, an individual church, but also the larger church. And when it came to sort of how World Mission was closed, there were definitely some people who kind of thought this was just people weren't happy because they lost their job. And while that is a real emotion that is completely understandable, that was not the concern, really. You know, I think everybody understood, and so now, by the time we got to Milwaukee, I think everyone did have a different understanding. But that was only after information that wasn't provided to our committee came out.
Right, so what he's kind of alluding to is, you know, there was the committee process, which was online, and there was a kind of a couple days, let's call them travel days, before the plenary was going to convene. And there was some information that kind of came out in that interim period that, let's say, in some, provided a different narrative than the one that was shared with the committee initially.
Yeah, so one of our resource persons who has a role on the Unified Committee provided information to us that was false. I mean, there's just really no other way to say it, and I don't, it's not my place to go into how or you know, there's a difference between being misinformed and lying, and you know, and right, and that's not really for me to say, but that information, and that it was specifically the stuff that was verifiably false was specifically around the language about what mission co-workers were asked to sign as they were entering this, and it was the picture that was painted to us was that it was really just a reminder that when you came on board as a employee, you were signed a covenant of conduct, which I think later we heard that, you know, the General Assembly Council had a very narrow legal definition of what a non-disclosure agreement is. But in the conversation that we were having, it was abundantly clear we were after perception and, you know, how it was applied and how it functioned, not whether this was, we were able to legally call it a non-disclosure.
Right, non-disclosure, non-disparagement, and some of the kind of the technical distinctions between those two were what it seemed to me that some people were kind of, you know, driving their, you know, stake in the ground and saying, but this matters. And yet at the same time, a lot of people coming to the issue, especially afresh, were like, all right, but yeah, like, okay, technically, but you're not telling us the whole story.
Right.
That happened in Utah the last time I was there.
Yeah.
You won before.
So one of the things, this kind of does get then down to definitions, right? And one of the things that we've seen over the last, you know, I don't know, 20 years probably is maybe some disagreement about how people use the word mission itself. What is mission? You know, and were there tensions that were emerging around kind of evangelism v. justice v. partnership and colonialism and ecumenism and witness?
Yeah, I mean, I think the real tensions were in a couple places. One, the tension that, you know, what we were told was one of the main reasons that this decision was made was because of, you know, as a sort of the next step in confronting colonialism.
Right, that was what was thrown out.
And that was directly contradicted by all of the testimony from the mission partners,
Yeah.
right? We didn't hear, and that question was directly put to one of our resource persons, and she, again, vaguely referenced it, and then said that was a major concern from several of the mission partners
Who cannot be named.
who can't be named, and it was it was one of those. I mean, if you've seen any of the congressional hearings, right? You can ask the question 10 times, but they're not going to answer it.
Yeah.
So we kind of moved on from that, but it was a very telling. It didn't and in fact one of the things that stuck with me, and I think a lot of other people, was a comment. I think it was made in one of the webinars prior to General Assembly, made in the open hearing portion, was that the first time they'd experienced colonialism from the PCUSA in the last 20 years was the closure of World Mission.
Yeah.
And so that was a real kind of telling moment, I think, for a lot of people, because again, what we heard was not knowing, if you don't know anything, you walk in and you hear the person who's in charge of giving you information saying, we heard from our partners that this would be helpful in confronting colonialism. Okay. But if you don't have the other side of that, you don't know.
So kind of as an outsider to the conversation, what I saw was that was kind of thrown out there. And what happened was, in the conversation way prior to General Assembly, and in the conversation over the closure, and even some of the conversations we had here last year, and the conversation at Union Seminary, was that we aren't buying this is an anti-colonial decision. In fact, one of the things that was said in part of the Mission Symposium, the testimony from people who've been working in World Mission for so long, is that actually World Mission is one of the most anti-colonial things that we're doing, and that our missionaries are actually the ones who are speaking into the church a vision that is anti-colonial.
Well, and it really struck a chord with me, because as a pastor and as somebody who's been present at New Wilmington for my whole life. Two reasons. I remember when we stopped officially calling our missionaries, and we started calling them mission co-workers. And I was at an age where I was like, well, that's dumb. They're missionaries, right? And then someone older and wiser than me, took the time to explain words matter, and we're trying to communicate something deeply important theologically by what we're saying, right? Because that's what we Presbyterians do.
Yeah.
And so what it's acknowledging, and yep, it's just a title, but it, again, words matter. And what we're acknowledging is we're not bringing Jesus anywhere. Jesus is already present. Jesus is already working. People are already working in Jesus' name, and we're going to come alongside that work.
Right.
And so that has always stuck with me, and that. Well, I was a history major. That is not colonialism, right? And then the second part that I just feel like I need to share is I was on the board of the conference when we went from the New Wilmington Missionary Conference to the New Wilmington Mission Conference. And there was a long discussion about whether we should be the mission conference or the missions conference. And I remember Don, really eloquently explaining that there aren't missions, there's a mission. It is the mission of God, and that we are taking part in it. And I hadn't even been to seminary yet. And, I didn't really think I needed to go after Don taught. So I went, I just didn't pay attention. That's how we did that. But, that has always, stuck with me. And again, that piece, I think we recognize, it wasn't just the people in the committee, it wasn't just the people who walked in with a knowledge of what had been happening in World Mission. I think nobody bought
Yeah,
That-
and that was it. I think they were, and again, I'm not trying to, like, I'm trying to
Yeah.
be as fair as we can be
Yeah.
here. But I also think, what I saw prior to assembly was this whole like, well, Presbyterians do mission and partnership, like that was news,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really, I think, a lot of the conversation ahead of the assembly was able to say, that's not gonna actually fly
Right.
for the justification
Yeah.
for what we're doing.
Right, and so, the combination of that just not holding water and us being misled is what led to, the substitute motion that got brought. And that was crafted by our committee, right? So, the Presbyterian Outlook story that provided reporting that confirmed we had definitely not been told the full story and really had been misled. Posted online less than 10 minutes after our committee ended our work on that Wednesday. And our moderators, to their great credit, tried to reconvene our committee and were told that was out of order. Yeah, can't do it, And so they, as commissioner members of the General Assembly, not as our moderators.
Right.
The first thing you really do is you have lunch with your committee, and they said, announcement. We all know what happened, and if that is troubling to you, basically, we need to go further than we did because with this being the case, we need to, a commission has powers that
Right.
a committee doesn't. And we believe the only way we will get any of the answers is to really empower a commission.
Right. So what we're getting at is one of the main kind of motions that came out of General Assembly was the creation of a review commission,
Yeah.
which is, it sounds, that actually matters. A commission is different from a task force. A commission actually does have some power to do things. That being said, it's a 4-year commission, so.
Yeah.
That's going to be a little bit
Yeah,
down the road.
how much it can do is
Yeah.
is still to be decided.
But I think what happened with the committee and what became its understanding of kind of being provided with some misinformation, I think was symptomatic of the whole thing, of the whole process of the closure of World Mission. And so the desire then that was spoken by some of the folks who wrote the initial overture to kind of review this process of closing World Mission, I think was reiterated and kind of testified to by the committee itself, just from their experience over the committee process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it was really, if the goal was to sort of squash this a little bit, it backfired.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was the people that were maybe less agitated, that less concerned about what had happened, became concerned, and I think it really led to a real, for me, one of the overarching themes of the entire assembly was a real crisis of trust
Sure.
in leadership, and this was central to it. Asking, saying, just look into it for us wasn't going to fly.
Right, and that's actually one thing I wanted to bring up. The requirement of the commission as it stands now was that it would be independent of many of the people and the bodies that were involved in the closure of World Mission, and even in some of the kind of the precursor stuff
Right.
that was leading up to it. And so that, I think, was put in there so that it might possibly have some credibility.
That's right.
And not feel like an inside job, so to speak. That said, editorial comment, because of that, so many people who are passionate about World Mission are actually going to not be able to be part of that commission. Okay, so if you do feel like you have interest and abilities, more power to you. There'll be an application process, and I commend that to your attention. But I know that. Several people in this room, we can't be on it. If you've ever worked for the PCSA, if you've ever been part of, one of the boards, so to speak. So that's, I think, something to note coming out of the conversation. So that was one thing that was done, was to create this independent review commission. There's two other things I want to mention. There is a review then that was discussed kind of independently, and I believe ultimately it might have been put under this commission.
Was answered by.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that Presbyterian Foundation and the review and the audit of designated funds. So tell us kind of your experience with that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the down and dirty version is that a lot of us who have been in sessions or boards or whatever know that, you know, in a financial crunch, you look for money that was allocated somewhere and figure out a way to take it to allow yourself to use it in other places.
To massage those
Yes,
definitions.
yeah, and you know, I think to a lot of us, especially given the experience we had, we felt like that was what was happening. You know, the world mission was closed because it was, and I mean this, you know, with respect, from their perspective, the easiest answer to this really big problem.
Yeah.
You
So
know?
the second reason, then, I mean, apart from this anti-colonialism being
Right.
the first one, the second reason was financial realities.
Yes.
As far as closure
Yeah.
of World Mission. And so when I was on the denominational board, I mean, World Mission was the largest part of our budget, and it used the largest portion of designated funds as anyone, but it also used the largest portion of undesignated funds, interestingly, which people didn't really realize. But the reality is, there are a lot of designated funds intended for the ministry of the church nationally to be sort of with the fiduciary responsibility of it on the foundation, but the programmatic responsibility and the connection responsibility on what's now known as Presbyterian Life and Witness.
Right.
And so there was a question then of if those funds, if we don't have World Mission, how are those funds going to be used?
Yeah, and I think again, for us, that, you know, independent nature was really important because it came down to a trust issue. You know, we did not trust that, and whether we did or not, we didn't think it was reasonable to trust that all of these funds, which we know are there, you know, were going to be allocated appropriately, and partly because of, you know, what I think is going to be your other question, because this action brings into question what do we mean when we say mission, right? What does the PCUSA think mission is? And if I'm going to be honest, I probably have a broader view of that than a lot of the people in this room. But I do still think you need to define it. And when you're talking about fiduciary responsibilities, my view of what mission is less important than the view of the person who gave the money.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and I think, you know, in some ways, hey, you may not be able to know that for sure, but if we can, we need to,
Right.
and we need to honor that.
Right. You know, funding trend, obviously, you know, unrestricted giving has been on a precipitous decline for years and years and years to the national church. There still is restricted giving, as we well know, you know, but if we were kind of gearing to give to a mission and a project and a partner, and suddenly there's really not the person who is, if you would, the steward of that relationship, what happens now? But what you've alluded to is the third thing that we need to talk about, which is missiology. And there's a call then, the Assembly approved a call for a new missiological statement. And it was my understanding that that was pretty well supported across the board.
Yeah, I mean, the longest discussion in committee about that was how much money we were going to give them and the size of the group. It was I think it's fair to say, a universal understanding that we need this. And it was just a question of, you know, what size and how much support we would give them.
So do you think that sort of the universal support on that was an affirmation for global witness? Was it a reaction to the closure of World Mission, or was it recognizing that the church really hasn't defined what its theology is for mission?
Yes.
I thought so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and there were elements of all three of that, which I think, for different, not everybody in that committee is deeply committed to global mission. Not everybody, not everybody was angered about what had happened, but I think everyone understood that what had happened was a symptom of us not knowing, or there at least being a disconnect, because I think, again, some of the elder commissioners were particularly upset because it was like, the one thing we heard about the last General Assembly is that we protected world missions.
Yeah.
Now, whether that's an accurate reading of what happened or not, I think that was a priority that aligned for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't followed, so how can that be?
Right.
And so that, we need to be able to talk.
So who's going to write this statement for us?
You? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a group that has not yet been put together. One of the things, we thought was really important was to have some, and we threw out some names you guys would be more familiar with than I would be, of some really good Presbyterian and Reformed missiologists, and we asked that we required that at least one of them be a part of that. And then it'll be made up of I forget the exact breakdown of who else is included, but the way all of our committees get made eventually.
I think that one of the things, if I can recall, is that there's some involvement with global partners on this.
Yes, yeah.
Which is good. That is something that kind of has been missing because, what the story has been is that global partners have been, informed on everything all along the way, but they couldn't ever say which global partners. And so it became hard to really validate that as something
Well,
that's
and then
true.
there were lots of global partners who were telling us that they hadn't been.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we got global partners, we've got people from congregations, we've got people who've been working in mission, we've been missiologists. So it should be a broad kind of swath.
That's the hope.
Okay. So do the actions of the General Assembly change what the structure is of the church now?
No.
No. Right.
Yeah, I think hopefully, we live in hope, right? And putting on my hopeful Christian hat that God works miracles even today, that new statement on mission could be powerful. It could be, and I think armed with our intent from of this review commission is not to be punitive. We think if we find action, I'm not part of that group, but if it finds actions that were inappropriate or out of order, there needs to be accountability for that. But that's accountability, not retribution, and a roadmap of where things went wrong. I think in part because there was misalignment on what mission is and what the priority is. So I'm really hopeful that might spring some, something new, because we know that God can do that. But yeah, we don't have that structure now, for sure.
No. So over the next 2 years, maybe 4 years, what do you think is the greatest sort of, let's say, danger that we're looking out for? Is it just kind of the institutional delay that kicks the can down the road? Is it treating a statement as if it's just something that's aspirational? And I've seen statements before.
Yeah, right. In the best case scenario, this statement is a blueprint But a blueprint is fairly meaningless unless you start building.
Right. I mean, I'd also say there's relationships in the meantime
Yeah.
that need to be attended to, and whether those relationships are maintained in a positive way. And then there's also the question of if, as trends continue, if financial reality is going to be driving our missiology.
Yeah, I mean, again, and this is maybe the most hopeful of all things, but one of the things I hope for is that this statement, when it's drafted, makes it abundantly clear the priority level for the church that this is. I've been a pastor of a 100-member church. I've been a pastor of a 600-member, 1,000-member church. Financial realities are financial realities, but you don't get yourself out of them by ignoring your call. And so for me, I don't think, okay, we don't have the money. Well, from my perspective, our call to be, we call ourselves a connectional church. Do we mean it? And we call ourselves a church. Do we mean it? And if we do, then those things need to be priorities.
Right.
And I think the parts of General Assembly that were in person were better in lots of ways and more impactful and certainly more community-minded than the ones that were online. But if you told me we couldn't hold in-person General Assemblies anymore because it's too much money, but that meant we got to go back to funding some mission co-workers, I'd be okay with that deal. Mm-hmm. I'm not the one that makes that decision, and it's not quite that simple, right? Or we probably would have done it. But again, whether it's your own budget or the church's budget or the national church's budget, you fund your priorities.
That's right. So I think one of the things to take away, at least in what I'm getting, is that we are kind of in this moment, right? Which and because some of these actions have kind of been forward-looking, we're going to be in this moment for quite a while. This issue is going to be in front of the national church and in the conversation where many general assemblies, it's like if anybody mentions mission, you might be surprised.
Yeah.
But this is going to be part of the conversation for at least the next two general assemblies. So, I think that's got to be good.
Yeah. It's better to talk about it than not.
Yeah, good. So, knowing that then, and as a congregational pastor, what are you looking for kind of as you communicate, issues of world mission to the congregation? I don't know what your situation was as far as partnering with mission coworkers specifically, or whether you're with a network, or if you're going outside of the denomination, but or if you're a big supporter of a global ecumenical liaison. Maybe that's true. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah. So we're in sort of a in-between time. When I came to be pastor of the church, the church had lost 100 members and $100,000 each of the last 4 years. And then my first finance committee meeting, I found out that our 100 child learning center was losing $25,000 a month. And so we really did have the keep the lights on conversation for a while. One of the things that we did right away was say, but at the same time, we have to invest in the missions that are important. But because actual cash was at an incredible premium, because at that point we still had a $1.5 million mortgage. We had this great facility. So we kind of doubled and tripled down on our weekly food pantry that had been going on forever, but was just this, it was doing good stuff for the people that were involved, but it was a very small number of people. And so we leveraged some partnerships to go from 25 to 30 families a week to 200 to 400 families a week. and that's with, you know, enough food for a family of 4 for 2 weeks. We used a building that we own for a family, well, it's called the Family Life Center, but it's a counseling center, but it's a pay what you can counseling center. So they're able to do that because they don't pay rent. They're able to do lots of that, and so we've leveraged a lot of those more local right now, and we're just now, having paid off the mortgage, having gotten ourselves into a different place, in a place where we're looking to invest. Well, and we had a partnership with 2 of our local schools as well, but looking to invest beyond our
Think a little bit more global.
yeah, think a little bit more globally, and that was and that's it's taken longer to get here than I would have liked. But we started with what we had and what we had consensus around.
Yeah, I hear that. This is it's a segue into the next conversation about kind of what congregations are, how congregations are thinking globally. But you know, we have a couple minutes left, I believe. Are we until 2:30 or are we done?
2:30.
Okay, so we have a few minutes. I would love if anybody kind of wants to, you know, kind of having questions for Chip or kind of comments or what have you. I know there were some other folks who were at Assembly, and I could just call on you and you could throw out your thoughts if we want. But is there anybody who wants to share before I just call on somebody? All right, Catherine, any thoughts?
I'm Catherine Fraley. I'm the pastor at Trinity Presbyterian Church in Mercer. I really appreciate what you do here at Mission Conference. I grew up in New Wilmington, and so kind of have my own story with you all coming here for all the big worship services in the morning and evening. Chip, you were so eloquent. So Chip and I were on the same committee, but I was one of the quieter ones that was a bit overwhelmed by being on Zoom with how many people were on there?
I mean, there were 60 commissioners, so there was like 75 people.
Yeah, so you just have to be real thoughtful about whether you want to speak up or to say what you thought needed to be said. So
Or
I
you
kind
could
of,
just keep speaking to some of our friends.
as they did. So I was the one in prayer for our good work and listening, but I think Chip was very eloquent and really you did a great job of kind of explaining the situation and the lack of trust, and yet just a great amount of support for our coworkers and the history of mission in the PCUSA. And so if I learned anything, it's that we have to go back as local churches and presbyteries and synods, and we have to make these connections happen ourselves. And as a wise person, Pam Courtney said to me recently in the church parking lot, and I'm not going to quote her quite right, but it's like, this is an opportunity to think differently and not wait for our denomination to figure it out. Because what I witnessed was like, oh yeah, that's going to take a long time. Like, so there's a gift here in connecting our people to our people and just going for it. So, and man, those committee meetings are long.
It's a great service. Our commissioners do us a great service. Thank you for that. James, I know you were at Assembly too, as an overture advocate. Did you want to add anything? No.
Yeah, there is this pain and gratitude. That pain of what we have lost, and grateful for the support that has been there all along. Last year when I came here, we had this in mind, those outlines of the vouchers by 5 of us, and then reached out to and to have 16 presbyteries endorsed. That is 1/10 of the presbyteries endorsed. And then the support from all along, and that gave me hope. So eternally grateful for what has happened, but that's not the end. The work continues.
That's right. That's right. Any other questions or comments or thoughts? Yeah.
You know, I'm a layman. I'm a little confused by everything I heard today. I'm a little confused by what the possible goal of all this could be. Do we ever want the PCUSA in charge of world missions again?
That's a good question. I mean, I think what Catherine was saying is kind of where, this is, in many ways, it is something that's filled with pain and so much of that, and yet it is also an opportunity to think differently. There are...
I'm sorry to interrupt. An opportunity to do what? I watched the decline of Presbyterian missions since I was a teenager in the 1970s. I've also watched the church in general, and I would be interested if anybody can name an issue this church has nationally has addressed, resolved, and moved forward on.
So, I'll take a stab at that. Because I maybe haven't alienated anybody yet.
Still time.
So I think, everything you say is accurate. As a pastor, I would say, when you say the Presbyterian Church USA, what you mean is us. And so I think one of the main reasons there's a lack of trust is because there has been a disconnect from the people making decisions for our denomination and the people in the denomination. And I think that was one of the things that in our overtures and in several other overtures, that was said loud and clear. And I think in respectful ways, but also in ways that were heard and probably were hurtful for some. And I would just say personally, one of the issues that our church, I think, has dealt with is not the right word, right? But every church has had to reckon with the issue of the inclusion of gays and lesbians and all, and the whole alphabet there. And I would say one of the reasons that I'm still a Presbyterian is the way that we did that and the way that we resolved it. Now, there were a whole lots of points in that process, and I don't know where anyone, I know where a few of the people in this room stand. I don't know where all the people in this room stand. But I also remember, and again, this place is where I learned that this is what it means to be a Presbyterian. When I, named the director, and they would invite people that they maybe didn't agree with theologically on this issue or others, but those people had a heart for mission, were doing the work of God somewhere, so they had a chance to speak, right? And we came down in a very Presbyterian thing, is we welcome everybody, but you church, if you don't, that's your conscience, and you pastor, if you don't, that's your conscience. Now, it's probably not fully accurate to say our church didn't split over this, because lots of churches have left, but the PCUSA didn't split over this. And we found a way, an imperfect way, a way that probably makes both sides unhappy at times, to say we believe we're still connected to each other even when we disagree about this. And I don't know that it gained us any members, but that's part of why I'm still here, because I know good, faithful Christians who I disagree with on this issue and who disagree with each other. And the ones that are Presbyterian, we get to say that we're still in community with each other. And I really value that. And that is the sort of work and the sort of attitude that I think gives us the ability to be partners in the world. I don't know that we've done it well, but the people in this room have done it well, in the larger church. But so for me, that's one issue. To say it's resolved is sort of silly, but that is an issue that we worked through, and I like where we ended up. That's not the right way to say it, but.
Yeah, I think I don't want to veer off into a different conversation, but one of the things, kind of back to thinking differently. I think the next conversation is maybe our congregation can work in a different way. Maybe our presbytery can actually get some energy around something. Maybe a synod. Maybe it's just an affinity group or a network. And it's not just, we'll wait for the denomination to tell us what we're doing.
Don't wait for them.
Because it's not going to happen.
and let's call them center left or center right. But the whole center of the church just rose up against the closure of Global Mission.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a different
It's a very
vision
different
of the
issue.
church.
Yeah,
So
very.
I actually think that the challenge for us is that there is a small part of the church that is actually speaking language that we all reject around colonialism and paternalism. That is a more progressive language that's maybe represents a smaller part of our denomination. And I think what I have in my conversations with people, I'm with the fellowship community, I'm having conversations with people center left, center right, saying our denomination is talking about things that we're not comfortable with. We don't think this is our church. And I think there's an opportunity for us together on both sides of the sexuality issue
Yeah.
that are sort of in the center of our denomination theologically to actually use our voice to say we're here and we're going to move ahead in mission the way we believe God's called us to. And I agree, we don't wait for the denomination. We have 4 years. Things have to be resolved in 4 years. And this morning, Ann talked about new wineskins. And I think there are new wineskins, and we have to have the courage and the confidence in God's leading to move forward in the structures that are broken right now and to come up with something new and be the church. We are so used to looking for the denomination to give us their approval, but we don't do that in our own church. We decide what we're going to do a food pantry, not just the denomination said to do it because we felt called. So I think there's an opportunity for us to rise up. It sounds like a revolution, but I mean, to use our voices and to lean into relationship with each other and to form something new in the place that God has called us.
Thanks, Mike. I know that there's others who want to speak, but I think we're out of time, and we've got another conversation coming up, so with kind of to honor that, we want to go ahead and close. If I could, Chip, could you maybe just say a prayer for us?
I am officially qualified for
Okay, you do it professionally.
Not well, but oh, holy God, thank you for your presence with us, for those in this room who have so faithfully served you, those who we could name that aren't present that have. Thank you for the fact that whether we're ready or our denomination is ready or what, you are still working and moving. And we pray that you would open our eyes and our ears to hear and see that work and give us the strength and the courage to take part in it with you. Bless us as we go from this place and seek to follow your will. Amen.
Thanks, Chip.
Thank you.